Israelites were taken into exile, why they lost the temple, why they lost their land, was because they did not abide by the covenant, by the law given to them by God. So they were very concerned, and Jeremiah worked in a very, very difficult time, where injustice was prevailing, where there was oppression of the poor and exploitation of the weak. This was the time in which Jeremiah worked. And Jeremiah saw spiritual revival under King Josiah, but he also saw the downfall of Israel and invasion of Israel by the Babylons. So Jeremiah worked in a very interesting, difficult time, and he had to deliver this to this king. So let's see, okay, the accusation to the unrighteous king. Let's see what the accusation is here. What is the accusation? He builds his house by unrighteousness and injustice. That's the accusation that Jeremiah brought to him, okay? So he says, woe to him. It's like, alas. It's like saying, curse be to you. Why? He builds his house by unrighteous means and injustice. Now, what did he wanted to build? What did this king wanted to build? We see a great house, spacious upper rooms, cedar paneling, vermilion painting. That's what he wanted. Okay? What he wanted was not a house, but a palace. In a time when the nation was struggling. In a time where there was not enough food for people. And this was the king. And this is what he wanted, a luxurious life. And we can see the hint of his desire for luxury. A great house, spacious upper rooms, cedar paneling. During those days, cedar paneling was the most expensive material that they can use, the most luxurious. And archaeological excavations at Ramat Rahel, that is in southern Israel, have identified palace buildings that can be dated to this king's time. So it is verifiable archaeological evidences. And several scholars, they are on the opinion that the construction mentioned in this passage was the house, the palace in which Josiah lived, his father. And he was not happy with it. He was not satisfied, so he wanted to renovate, make it bigger, make it more luxurious, lavish, okay? That's what he wanted. So, that is what he wanted to build. Now, how does he do this? How does he do this? We find that in verse 13. See, he does it by making his neighbors serve him for nothing and does not give them their wages. Now, this is very interesting because the Hebrew word used for neighbor here is Ria, which can sometimes be translated as a friend. So he himself, the king himself here, is described as a neighbor, meaning he is to be a friend to his people. And he uses his friends. What? He exploited them. For what? To advance himself, to build this luxurious palace for himself. So instead of advancing his people, the people under his reign, the friends that are with him, what does he do? He exploits them. So that is the accusation. So how does Jeremiah respond to this? Jeremiah's sarcastic response, we find that in verse 15. Do you think you are a king because you compete in cedar? Now, what is he saying? He's saying a luxurious building. Just because you have a luxurious palace, it does not make you a king. So, let's move on. What makes a king? What makes a king then? Now we come to the righteousness of King Josiah, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to explain this and get the gist out of it, and then we move on to application, okay? So he says, did not your father eat and drink and do justice and righteousness. Then it was well with him. He judged the cause of the poor and needy. Then it was well. So what makes a king? He's saying, your father, which is referring to Josiah. Okay? Josiah brought revival to Israel. He brought back worship, spiritual revival during his time. He destroyed all the temples that was built by the previous kings. And in 2 Kings 23, he's described as there was no king ever like him, not before him, not after him. So that was how righteous. And what was the basis of his righteousness? What makes him a good king? He did justice and righteousness, and he judged the cause of the poor and needy. In other words, Josiah lived well. Maybe not luxurious, but he lived well. That's what he's saying. Josiah reformed the people. He restored worship. He revived the people. How did he do it? By dispensing justice and righteousness in accordance with the law. He lived well. He knows the Lord. Okay? Now, let's contrast with King Jehoiakim. Verse 17. Now, God is not against being luxury. Okay, God is not against wealth. But what was his problem? Verse 17. You have eyes and heart only for your dishonest gain. You have eyes and heart only for shedding innocent blood. You have eyes and heart only for practicing oppression and violence. All right. So before we go to this unrighteous king, let's see this understanding of mishpat, okay? Justice. What does justice means in the Hebrew understanding? Now, it has a wide area of definition. As jurisprudence, it could mean decision that covers the entire judicial procedure, a legal case, a verdict, a judgment, punishment, and deliverance. As right, it could refer to legal right, God's active intervention to deliver or punish. As law refers to God's law, commandment, human law, and so on. Okay? But in this context, in the context of Jeremiah, mishpat means that which is according to the law. And that law is according to Mosaic law. Now, for us to make things, to simplify things, what is the law for us? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and mind, and love your neighbor. In their time, neighbor was somebody close to them, their fellow countrymen. But Jesus expands that boundary. Jesus cuts that boundary off. How did he do that? He said, your neighbor is your enemy. Your enemy is also your neighbor. Okay? So, there's no boundary for who your neighbor is. So, according to this, when they are to act according to that, that is what justice means. In this context, as Israelites, there are obligations or responsibilities that everyone ought to fulfill toward others. In other words, we could say, where there is mishpat, where there is justice, there are people fulfilling a set of responsibilities according to the Mosaic covenant. That is what justice means. And now righteousness again. This word basically means what is right. It means to act in a right and just manner, to be fair, honest, and act with integrity. In the context of ancient Near East, this word usually refers to order of existence. So it could be said there is tzedek, there is righteousness, if the society is ordered. Now the question for us is, what could be the standard for order? What is the standard? In the Hebrew or Israelites' mindset, Yahweh, God is the one who orders existence. How was Yahweh doing that? He made a covenant with these people. I will be your God, he says, and you will be my people. Now, in short, this means Israel's righteousness was supposed to be evident in how they display this in their relationship with one another. The word justice and righteousness always used in the context. Most of the time it's used in the context of social relationships. Okay, so that is what. So Bruce Walke make it easier for us. He says, this is a quote from Bruce Walke. He says, the righteous person, can you go to the next slide? The righteous person is the one who disadvantages themselves for the advantage of the community. And the wicked advantage themselves by disadvantaging others. Let's keep these two words in mind. Okay, justice and righteousness. So let's go to the next slide. So what happened to King Jehoiakim? His unrighteousness. We have seen the righteousness of Josiah, now the unrighteousness. His eyes and heart, meaning his whole being, his desire was the pursuit of luxury. And he was willing to compromise the law of taking care of people. So he has no problem shedding innocent blood because his heart, he was determined to get what he wants. Now, he did not follow in the footsteps of his father. His father was concerned with justice and righteousness, but he was focused on his selfish ambitions and interests. So he did not mind what would be the cost in the process of his selfish pursuit. And he even resorted to extortion. If we read 2 Kings 23:35, we will find that. So how does he end? How does his life end? It says, it's a sad ending for a king. Just read this. The Lord says this to this king. They shall not lament for him, saying, ah, my brother, ah, sister, ah, Lord, ah, majesty. With the burial of a donkey, he shall be buried, dragged, and dumped beyond the gates of Jerusalem. Oh, what a deplorable end for a king. This is not the way kings are supposed to be buried. This is not the way kings are supposed to be treated. What a disgraceful end. No one is going to lament for his loss. He will not even have a proper burial. His burial would be the same with a donkey's burial. Now, some commentators suggested that he was assassinated by pro-Babylonian party in Jerusalem, and his body was dumped outside Jerusalem. We can find it Jeremiah 36:30. Some says there's a stark contrast. He wanted himself to build a palace for himself, but look at where he dies. Does not even have a proper burial. Imagine, look at this. Very interesting. A commentator says it's a ritual act of reclassification, meaning in spite of the king's claim to honor, fame, and grandeur fit for a king, his death reclassifies him with business, with no glory whatsoever. Think about that, my friends. So, what does knowing the Lord really means? What does knowing the Lord really means? Now we get to the climax of this passage, and we'll see that here. Now let's go to some text. Go to the next slide, please. Yeah. Yes, we find this to understand the word know. Okay, yada. I'm going to give you some text from Jeremiah. That way it'll be clear. So, for my people are foolish. This is in Jeremiah 4:22. They know me not. Why? They have no understanding. Why? Because they are wise in doing evil. Okay? So they don't know me, God says. Move on to the next passage. In Jeremiah 9, they bend their tongue like a bow. Falsehood and not truth has grown strong in the land. For they proceed from evil to evil, and they do not know me, declares the Lord. Why they do not know God? Because their tongues are like a bow, falsehood and not truth. Okay, they proceed from evil. Now they heap oppression upon oppression and deceit upon deceit. They refuse to know me, God says. They don't know me. Now, this group of people, these Israelites, claim that they know God. And they say, we are under the covenant. But God is saying, nah, you don't know me. Okay? Why? Now, you get a glimpse of what this word means. See, they do not know the way of the Lord. They do not know the way of the Lord. So what is this word yada? Okay? What is this word yada and da'at that we find here? What does it mean? What does knowing mean? It's not mere intellect, as we said in the beginning. We know people by mere intellect. Some of us know each other by face, but we don't really know our lives. We don't really know. And yet, we think, I know this person, just because we know their name. We don't even know their full names. We don't even know their last names. But we say, I know them. Now, that's not the way to know the Lord. You might know His attributes. You might know God is creator God. God does this, God does that. God is mercy and all that. But God is saying, no, they don't know me. Okay? They don't know me. So, what does it imply? What does this verse mean? Can you go to the next slide? So, in verse 23-24, it says, let him who boasts boast with this, that he understands and knows me, that I am Lord, who practice steadfast love, justice, and righteousness. And in these things I delight. God is saying, I delight in these things. Now go to the next slide, please. So what does the word know means? It implies the exercise of affections. When you know, there should be evidence that you know. Okay? And in its highest sense, it connotes obedience to His laws. So knowing and obedience should go together. If you just know all the sound doctrines of the Bible, but it's not evident in your life, God says you don't know me. God says you don't know me. Now, it is not just an intellect knowledge, but relational. You know Him by relationship. This intimacy, you just don't know Him by your head, but you know Him by your life and by your actions. There should be evidence of their knowledge of God in their lives. Okay? So now, let's go to the passage. I've checked this from, I've done this, I do this on a chiastic structure so that it will be easy to understand the heart of this passage. So don't just stay there. So the accusation, okay? So this is a reversal form of structuring a passage. That way you see the contrast. Now the accusation to the unrighteous king, the accusation was he wants to build this, he wants to build a palace. And he does it by his unrighteousness, by injustice. Now how does it end? It ends, his body is dumped outside the gates of Israel. Okay? That's how he ends. He wanted to build a palace, but look at where he dies. What a contrast, what an irony, right? And the righteousness of King Josiah is contrasted with his unrighteousness. So, in verse 16c, it says, Josiah is doing justice and righteousness. He's caring for the poor and the needy. And he says, God says, is this not to know me? So what is knowing God, my friends? Knowing God is doing justice and righteousness. It should be reflected in our social. It should respond to the social needs. And that is the way God structured the law. That there will be justice, righteousness, and when the kings reign. And that is what people experience for a short period of time under King Josiah. The cause for the poor. To be the voice for the voiceless. And the kings were supposed to guard this. And this king was not doing that. And he says, you do not know me. So, knowing God and doing justice and righteousness, it equals in that way. So two things we can learn from here. To know the Lord is not only to have an intimate relationship with Him, but to fulfill the demands of the covenant, especially in terms of their social relationships and responsibilities. So that is one. And second, it could also imply that Jehoiakim may have a view that he knows the Lord. Okay? But God says, no, you don't know the Lord. Because you're not doing justice and righteousness. not bringing in justice and righteousness. You're exploiting people. You know that these people need you, and you're exploiting that very need. You're forcing them to labor to build your palace, and you're not paying them what they ought to be paid. So that is what God is saying. So, in essence, knowing the Lord is reflected in doing justice and righteousness. Relationship with the Lord, vertical dimension, is only validated by the people's commitment to do justice and righteousness, horizontal dimension. So your vertical relationship with God should be reflected in how you treat one another. That is the whole law, okay? So, now, let's come back to us. Why should we do it? Now, this is going to be an application. Why should we do it? What is the theological basis for this? What is the reason for us to do this? It says, to know God is to know what He does and what He delights in it. He tells us He delights in justice. Imagine you know someone, you love someone, and you don't want to do what that person loves. Is that true love? Is that true knowing? Is that true knowledge of the person? You don't care how the person wants to be taken care of. You don't care how the person, how the other person wants you to address the person. How he or she wants to be talked to. How she wants to be treated, he wants to be treated. You don't care. Would that be considered love? Now, God says, if you really want me to delight, I delight in justice. When you rule in justice and righteousness, when your social relationships is doing well, when you're treating each other fairly, when you do your work fairly and honestly with integrity, I delight in that. You know me, God says. That should motivate, that should be the basis, the theological basis. To say we know God and do not care about doing justice is like a situation which we claim to know someone intimately but did not know anything. Now Jeremiah 22:15-16 says it more very clearly that knowing God equals doing justice and righteousness, which means taking up the case of the poor and the needy. It is not a matter of propositional knowledge, but intimate, relational knowledge. That is what God wants from us. Now, do people who don't believe in God works for justice? They do. They do that. They do. Some non-Christians are way better than us in fighting for justice, in trying to do the right thing, in trying to make society right, in fighting against a system that is corrupt. Now, I don't deny that people do that, but without God, it may not last long. Even when that is achieved, it could lead to self-righteousness, because it should be grounded. A reason for doing it should be grounded in humility and love, not in other things. And when we fight for justice, when we're doing these things right, and we're being righteous, it could lead to pride. And sometimes we could be doing these things out of pity, out of superiority, not out of love. So, that is the reason. It is a reflection of our authentic relational knowledge of God. So, that is why we should do it. Now, who should do it? Who should be the one to do it? Now, Jeremiah 9:23, it says, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, let not the mighty man boast in his might, let not the rich man boast in his riches. So he's referring to the educated, successful, the affluent. Now again, in chapter 22, verses 1 and 2, it says, go down to the house of the king of Judah and speak there this word. Hear the word of the Lord, O king of Judah, who sits on the throne of David, you and your servants and your people who enter these gates. Now, the king of Judah, officers and people who enter this gate represent not only leaders, but people with some level of influence, success, or power. So, Jeremiah is giving us two types of people who specifically who should be doing this work of justice and righteousness. Now in this passage it's addressed to a king, right? But it's not exclusive only to this if we come to the New Testament, right? Because we, the church, should do it. Because God says, love me and love your neighbors. These two cannot be separated. We might be very strong in loving God, but if it's not reflected in loving others, God says, you don't know me, you don't love me. And sometimes we do it, we are very strong on this side, on the horizontal dimension, that we think that we don't need God. This is our basis for the horizontal dimension. So the church also must do it. We have a responsibility to do justice. Now, if you're a Christian who has a good education, a measure of success, comfort, the ability to work on projects, a degree of wealth in savings and investment, then you are one of these people. You are one of these people. You and I have special responsibility to understand and apply biblical justice in our lives. Because God has blessed us with many things, including the ability to help others. Now, how can we do this? This is the last part. How can we do this? How does knowing God lead us to doing justice? By disadvantaging ourselves for the sake of others. Jeremiah 9:23-24 again provides us with clarity. He distinguishes two types of people and their motivations. There are those who boast in their own wisdom, might, and wealth. Now, if you continually boast in these three, you will never boast in the grace of God. This type of boasting will cause you to fault others if they lack the same qualities that you attribute to your own doing. And even if you try to help them, it would be out of superiority, out of pity, rather than love. Now, to boast in the second three, that is faithful love, justice, and righteousness because you know God, means that you have been broken by divine grace. Grace is cracked into that heart that is selfish. There's a crack and light has entered, and that heart is beginning to bid for the Lord, to bid for the Lord. And you want to do it out of love. Now, Ephesians 2:8-9 reminds us that we have been saved by grace through Christ, that no one may boast. And Paul writes, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. If we have any reason for boasting, it is not in ourselves, but because of God's grace. This does not mean that wisdom, might, or wealth are bad. Now, if we understood wisdom, the education you have, the success you have, the money you have, the level of influence you have, if you understand that as grace of God and gifts from God, how would that lead you to serve? How would that motivate you to serve? Will it motivate you to serve, or will you use that to advantage yourselves by disadvantaging others? So, if we understood these things as gifts, in this way we agree with the gospel, and the gospel motivates us to act in justice and righteousness, toward others in humility as Christ did with us. Now we look at the servant king on the cross. He disadvantaged himself to advantage you and me on the cross, my friends. Now, we remember Jesus coming and riding on a donkey. Let me give you a context of that passage so that you understand why people were shouting, Hosanna, Hosanna, which literally means save us, okay? So, the Israelites, after their exile, they have no more, they don't have kings anymore. They have always been under a foreign rule. The Persians came, then the Greeks came, then the Romans came. Now, they have always had foreign rulers. There was a brief time under Maccabees that they reigned, but it did not last long. So, they have been under foreign power. Imagine being ruled by a foreign king, or by a foreign nation. For how many years? 400, 500, 600 years. It's a long time. Now they have been doing that. Now, on top of that, they have heavy taxation imposed on them. From the Roman government, they have to give tax. Another heavy taxation, that is temple tax. Temples, they have to pay tax. And these taxes were not used for the goods of the people, but it advances whom? The priests. Okay, the offices of the temple. So they have this heavy taxation imposed on them. Now, religiously, they were oppressed. They cannot simply go to the temple and pray. They need to find favor with the priests. They had to bring something, and the priests had to make it on behalf of them. And these offerings, for somebody who does not have enough to eat, two meals in a day, giving a tax and going to the temple and offering something is still going to be so heavy. There were no jobs available all the time. So many of them were in a very poor condition. Okay, poverty was relevant. And under this context, Jesus came riding a donkey. So when they saw Jesus, they understood his ministry, his love and his grace and his mercy, and his healing power. So this was not a king coming riding a horse with his soldiers marching before him. It was donkey, and there were no soldiers. But when they saw Jesus, they laid down whatever they have for him, befitting a king. And they said, save us, Hosanna. Save us from this. Because they thought this is a king. And they love him. They love him because he was the people's king, my friends. He was the people's king. And they know under him there will be justice, there will be righteousness. He is going to be the one taking up the case of the needy and the poor. So Jesus was a breath of fresh air. We can become that only if this humility hits our hardened hearts. Only when this Christ, this servant king, reaches the depth of our brokenness and fixes us from the inside, and our hearts begin to become alive, only then can we use our gifts, the education we have, the money we have, the influence we have to serve the nation, to serve people. May God bless us.